Welcome to the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, where we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell. I've been working in and around higher ed for the past decade, focused on student support and digital experience. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology who will be bringing you their perspectives on how digital transformation is reshaping the way we recruit, engage, and graduate learners. You'll hear firsthand accounts of how institutional leaders are developing their strategy, as well as get deeper on the stories of how these EdTech tools are being built to foster better student outcomes. With that, let's get to today's episode. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, episode number 328, with Andy McIsaac from Laserfish, a unique organization that does work here in the higher education space around kind of document management and workflows and automation. Always appreciate work that kind of exists across the board there, helps everyone be more effective and efficient, do their jobs better, be more supported, and make sure that humans are interacting with each other for, the more high impact, important moments rather than just being bogged down in manual processes. And that really is just a big thing of the moment, certainly with AI, but there's a lot of other ways that institutions can persist and thrive and survive and all that good stuff. Without further ado, this is episode number 328 with Andy McIsaac. Always appreciate opportunities like this to get to know an organization that is new to me, but doing important work in our space here. I keep making sure I understand kind of all the different approaches and kind of context for the work happening in institutions all over the country on kind of the core topic that we cover a lot here. Digital transformation in higher education at colleges and universities all over the country. But Andy, if you want to kick us off, just briefly introduce yourself and your background, and then, just talk a little bit about the work that Laserfish does.
Yeah, thanks, Dustin. Thanks for having me. My name is Andy McIsaac. I am currently the solutions marketing leader here at Laserfish that covers higher education. But I've been a long time go-to-market leader within the public sector, working with both higher ed and government for various organizations such as IBM, Accenture, and Alteryx prior to coming to Laserfish. What we do here at Laserfish in this space is that we're a document management, content management, process automation platform. So we help organizations really organize their content, help them abide by any type of compliance regulations that they need to abide by, protecting that information. It's all based in security, but making sure the data is accessible, the data is trusted, and allowing them to automate how that information moves through their various workflows.
Yeah, and I even think we haven't really had a company that works so specifically in that area. And I think I know just broadly, just with my own journey with the show and the great kind of opportunities I get to learn from folks is like the idea of all the sort of various kind of infrastructure that goes into kind of all the kind of mechanisms digitally at institution for everything to work together and work better together. The work that you are doing, I think, is probably very much tied into institutions that are building out like their digital education portfolios, having more fully online or hybrid students, like their need to just be able to, these institutions need to be able to manage their workflows through all these digital means where otherwise there might be a presumption of, you could come get the form or you have to hand it in to somebody or whatever else. So just curious to your sort of perspective on that, of just the work that you all are doing being very much tied into kind of just the digital evolution and transformation of these institutions.
I don't know your vintage. My vintage, there was very much a paper-based application and a paper-based financial aid form, all that stuff. That's changed, obviously. We live in a digital age, and that creates a lot of really good opportunity, but it also can create some challenges, right? Because for students, prospective students, when they come, they're not in this digital world. They're not benchmarking you against other universities. They're benchmarking you against your ability to deliver services as compared to Amazon, as compared to banking apps or other types of real-time services, right? Everybody lives in a YouTube, Google, ChatGPT world, right? Students are expecting those types of services. So the challenges for college and universities is how do, all those services rely on data. And how do you protect that data? How do you utilize that data and move that data through the various workflows and so forth, whether it's verifying a financial aid application, whether it's approving somebody's credit transfer. Those are all different processes that require different people to review. But how do you move that information and you prevent the student or the parents or whoever from going to one department and then taking that same information going to another department, where you can automate that process and but also protect that data as it moves through and goes to the right people for approval. And then people can understand, where is my application? Where's my financial aid package? And so you're providing that higher level of service that people expect in their everyday lives. And I think that's what we're seeing. That's been the big game changer. And we get to work with some really great universities, some very big universities and smaller community colleges who all have the same kind of challenges. It's really, how do we help them automate their workflows to provide the best possible service to their students?
Yeah, for my vintage, it matters when you're doing so many different workflows and so many of them at a large scale, where they'd be like, oh yeah, you can get the form, like you can download a PDF, but then it's like you can't fill it out. So you still have to like print it out, fill it out, scan it in, email it in. But then the idea of you doing all that and having to then like email it to a person who then has to maybe do something else with it and send it up. It's that idea of, okay, the forms or whatever else is embedded in a system that once it's completed, it triggers and has all those like steps and everything into it. Because I think that's the idea that I've had moments like that of office or department are saying like, oh no, our forms are all digital, but it's completely manual. So that kind of, as a segue to my next point here, how are you seeing automation in those workflows and just kind of things being more smartly designed, impacting student services and like the admin workflows that go along with them?
Automation obviously adds a couple of things. Speed, for instance, speed and efficiency, right? The information comes in, you only need it moves through the process. You're able to understand where it is in the process, right? Where it might be delayed, where it's hung up. You can quickly identify, is there information that's missing, that's required? It helps alleviate the delays, right? And because when you're talking about college and progressing, matriculating, there are a lot of high stake emotional moments that are within the student journey. And so delays contribute to things like anxiety and confusion and even disengagement, right? Students become dissatisfied, right? Or parents become dissatisfied, right? Where automation allows you to provide that speed and clarity. So students have more confidence in what's happening with their information, their application, their request to transfer or change a major or whatever. And if they have more confidence and maybe can relax a little bit that they're being treated correctly and efficiently, they're more likely to stay, right? Because they feel like they're valued. And I think that's every delay that's in a process is a moment of uncertainty, right? And I think automation really kind of removes that friction and that uncertainty. But doesn't remove all the uncertainty, but I think at least the self-inflicted uncertainty can be removed.
Yeah, I do think that is a big piece, like the transparency you'd mentioned before, and just getting things done and resolved. Like one, like out of the queue of the staff member, like they can just clear things out, be like, all right, nobody's waiting on me for anything. We're good. But then, yeah, like the student feels more at ease. Yeah, parents and other stakeholders there. But because I think it is an idea of efficiency being valuable in and of itself. But in these situations, like it often is, maybe the student, needs that credit transfer evaluation before they do many subsequent steps of choosing classes or whatever else. But I think it is that, like how you're saying, like nowadays, especially like adult learners, whoever else, they are expecting problems to be solved quickly. The idea of just those like routine quality of life sort of things that a student goes through, as much as the sort of like more larger kind of high impact or kind of bigger things that happen. We've done episodes recently on things like study abroad. It's like, oh my gosh, yeah, the student going for 3 months away at a different country in the world. That's a huge part of their experience, and they're probably going to be like really satisfied, and that'll be very influential on their point of view. But you may also then have like death by 1,000 cuts if it's just like all these different like workflow and administrative things that you're just trying to do to get done, things to get done as a student at this institution. If there's always friction and hurdles or delays and all that, it's just, it can add up, and it all counts around your persistence, your retention, your satisfaction, and your sort of positive affinity towards the institution. So all that being said, if you just want to like any kind of reflections, anecdotes, or just further examples around the importance of this work and how it supports institutional goals around student satisfaction.
Yeah, when students are able to see where they are in the process, or that request is being progressed, right? It builds a deeper level of trust, right? And that trust, the trust that I'm valued as a person, I'm seen, my information is being treated correctly, and they're responding to my needs. that can become a very strong competitive advantage for universities. You take a big place like Kansas State University, right? They were able to do through their automation processes. They calculated themselves that they saved 49,000 staff hours by being able to reduce the processing time for a credit transfer or change of major transfer, a number of different processes, right? And okay, great efficiency, but what does that efficiency actually do? I don't have to have somebody typing in data from one form to another. Maybe I can reposition that to a higher level of service, right? I'm not processing now. I can go into more deeper problem solving because not everything is going to get solved by automation. Sometimes there are hiccups in systems and things like that. People are missing or people need additional guidance. But now I've got the resources to give that student that more individualized level of service. And so I think that's really great. It's giving very hardworking staffs more time to actually support students at a deeper level. And I think that's really the value of things like automation. So I think in Kansas State universities, Texas A&M does it with Laservision. We have a number of community colleges that do it as well. And because we understand traditional students are one thing, right? But now we've got a lot of non-traditional students, people coming back to education, adult learners trying to go to night school. They've got a lot of other different things, right, going on in their lives that they just want to know that their needs are being met. And sometimes they do require that additional level of service. How are you going to give it to them if you don't apply some automation to have the staff resources available to make that deeper level of interaction?
Yeah, I think all really good points there. And honestly, I appreciate really you keep coming back to trust. I think that is obviously the core of all the things that I was extrapolated on is you just trust that the institution's going to take good care of you and that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, the idea of today's learners are busy enough, so we should not be bogging them down in these inefficient processes. But I think much of what we've talked about is around those qualitative goals that you'd be okay, students are satisfied, they're happy, it's trust, it's all these sort of things. But then I appreciate that you're okay, let's, in addition to that, we can also quantify it in the hours and minutes, and you can put some dollars and cents on that too, of saving time and all that. And then, yeah, that idea of you can put staff members to higher level work or kind of more face-to-face work with students and everything. But it just keeps coming up time and time again. And a big storyline right now with digital transformation, whatever form and shape it takes, with AI or whatever else, is that idea of can we free people from these super manual, time-intensive processes to then be able to do higher level service work, higher level analytical work, or kind of strategy building, or whatever it might be. I'm curious, I guess, as a brief follow-up on that point, I guess, if conversations that you have sometimes go more or less in one of those directions of, I really want to know about the return on investment of using this platform in this process, that would justify the cost. And other ones maybe, I'm sure, care about that, but maybe do care more about the student satisfaction piece, the trust building, that sort of things. I'm just curious, kind of the impression that you get or the conversations that you're having with institutional leaders and how those metrics come up to measure the efficiency or effectiveness.
I think what I tend to, depending on who you're talking to, every conversation is going to be a little bit different. But I think when you're talking about institutional leaders and are looking at, hey, what does my enrollment look like? What's my enrollment projection? And I was talking, explain to me how does a student enroll? What are some of the processes, right? Because what you find, you get underneath it, and especially if they're not meeting some of their enrollment goals and objectives, then obviously there's a lot of macro things, but there's a lot of micro things too within an institution. What does the operational friction look like? Because operational friction, because there are a lot of other educational avenues that it's highly competitive. If somebody says, hey, it's too burdensome, right? That operational friction can translate into an enrollment risk, right? If you're not looking at your processes, students notice that stuff, parents notice that stuff, right? If they're not getting a high level of service, well, then maybe if you can't do this effectively, then maybe longer term, am I going to invest in 4 years here? And so they need to start looking at it that way, right? Sometimes it's not how you market, it's what you do to the people that do respond, right? And are interested, and how well you respond to them and how effectively. The better you can do to reduce that operational friction, the more seamless people are going to see the experience, and then more likely they're going to hopefully enroll and hopefully stay. That's the way we kind of look at it. There's always people who are going to want to look at it from a numbers perspective. Okay, I've got X number of employees. They're overworked currently. If I can leverage them more effectively, get them to do higher value work, how does that translate? And people like Kansas State University have done, I think, a fantastic job of measuring it out, right? Those are their numbers, right? They've seen that overall effectiveness. And we've got other customers who talk about that. So I think it's a balance. There's both a macro view of, hey, I got to meet, at the end of the day, higher education is about enrollment. And obviously you want to service the students and provide the education and training and whatever so they can become productive members of society. But you got to have the enrollment numbers to do that, right? And then there's also, how do I make my university more productive? How do I improve employee satisfaction? Things like that, how to reduce the burdens there. It's a mix, definitely. But I see when I talk to specifically educational leaders or institutional leaders, they're looking about how they're going to make their enrollment numbers and what are things that they can do to make their universities more attractive.
Yeah, they're definitely, as I was reflecting and hearing your response, it's like, obviously, they're so intertwined and reliant on each other. I get the idea of, like the cost savings, freeing people time, staff members time, and allowing them to do higher quality support. Obviously, that's going to be more satisfying and all those sort of things. But I think, it just made me think, because I always think in like metaphors, that idea of like you're saying it's depending on where you are, and you might be just getting general feedback from students or something that's not specific. It's so hard to like get things done at this institution, whatever. And the idea of lifting up the hood and looking, like, you are running, but you're running like pretty dirty here. We could probably clean things up and have it be a little bit more efficient. A car or something is just what's coming to mind. But and I guess, depending on like the leader that you're talking to, what sort of areas they feel like they're hitting friction or just not hitting the mark or whatever, it would be that idea of like, certainly, like enrollment, bringing a student into an institution is going to be a lot of like paperwork and kind of administrative stuff that goes with that. And certainly if that's burdensome on the student, the more time, the less likely I would say they would be to enroll. But then the idea of on any efforts in that area, you do just need to have people to do it, to be reaching out, to talking with them, to answering their questions. So the idea of, if we're going to hit our targets here, certainly, it's going to be that just kind of quantitative, like the time spent and all that kind of stuff. But it's also going to be the humans making those phone calls, sending those emails, booking those meetings, going out to events maybe or whatever else. And it's like, that would be just that much more possible if the various workflows and things you have are more efficient. And I guess it's like, for me, I do love it when you can get into those down to, we save this much time, which like, okay, what's the average team member's like hourly rate or whatever? We can like really just literally get down to understanding those sort of things. I think can be just very compelling and very powerful and motivating and all those sort of things. But at the end of the day, you are trying to make sure that you are recruiting students, getting them in, serving them well, getting them through to graduation. And that is a collection of various like innumerable moments of interacting with the institution for various services and things like that. Again, it all counts. It all adds up for sure.
It definitely adds up. And things like, especially when you think about students coming in, it's not really it is a back-end process, right? But it's a back-end process that directly translates to an experience that a student or even a parent's having, right? So the registrar's office, right, it can be one of the most important drivers of that overall student experience, right? Because it really dictates what your journey is going to be and what classes you're enrolled in and what credits are going to transfer. And so you have to look, there's a back-end process that drives that. It's the information and how that information is secured and processed and automated and so forth. But that all translates at the end of the day to the experience that someone has within your institution.
I think, again, with this being the infrastructure piece, but I think you do have to think so much about all these kind of things that might very much feel behind the scenes. There is something out in front that they are interfacing with. And you can make those determinations, I think, as you're building your tech strategy, or your tech stack and your kind of digital strategy around what does the student need to see, what don't they need to see, how are things all kind of interplaying and working together in the back end. But there's so much around everything that an institution does that has to find that fine line. And I know some of our recent conversations have talked about the historical trend towards decades ago. It was like, all this works really great for us as the staff and faculty and whatever else. It's okay, we maybe need to scooch it a little bit over on the spectrum where it still helps achieve all the institutional goals, but works just as well for the students and their kind of user experience. So we will start to wrap up here with the question that we love asking all of our guests. advice that you would give to higher ed leaders who are navigating this moment?
Now, look at your processes, but really look at them. And I think Dustin, you can talk about, it's one thing that you have a bunch of PDF forms up on your website and great, but really what happens with that information? How is that information processed through your system? Dissect where the intersect points are. Who needs to see that information? And sometimes you'll be surprised at how many people actually need to touch it. And are there areas that automation of bad process is still automation of bad process? Look at what the process, where can you drive the efficiencies of? Where are you exposing yourself to compliance or security risk within your existing processes? Look at your processes as a whole, and then you can identify areas where you can either better automate, better streamline, but really at the end of the day, where can you better serve the students that you're trying to serve through the automation? And I think you'll be surprised, right? It is when you start looking at how it affects students at the end of the day and how it affects your staff at the end of the day, you'll learn something from it. And then you can find areas for improvement and start to implement against that.
I think that is a great place to start in terms of taking an honest look at student journeys and all that sort of stuff. And certainly, I don't think our show is certainly very student oriented in terms of student support initiatives and efforts from institutions. But I think maybe mentioned briefly in passing sort of employee satisfaction and all that, the idea of the employee journey as they start an institution or just how they're doing their day-to-day and all that. It certainly probably some influence on kind of the student experience through that as well. But I think that idea of mapping things out, getting feedback, understanding where you are and where you want to go is a great place to start. And then kind of use that to inform the way that you are starting to improve and automate your workflows and just having everything better serve everybody. I do appreciate your willingness to jump in, talk about this, and share all the great work that you and your team are doing there at Laserfiche. And just really appreciate the ability to introduce you and your organization to our audience. We'll have ways to connect with you and Laserfiche in the episode description. And this was just super great for me to kind of just click into a different part of my brain with some of this stuff. And just thank you so much for joining the pod.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to the Higher Ed Geek podcast. This show is a proud member of the Enrollify network, home to Higher Ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow. So be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit Enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and content drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com.